Kingdom Hearts battle stances are weird. They've got dramatic flair, but are they practical? Honestly, I wouldn't have thought so, until I realized something important. I have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm not a master fencer, nor have I ever sparred with anyone, so who am I to pass judgment on my spiky-haired brethren? That realization sent me down a rabbit hole of historical combat arts where I discovered a treasure trove of stances and movements, each with its own unique utility. It made me wonder, what does it mean for someone to favor a particular stance? Why would a character default to a specific posture? In character design, even the smallest details can offer a glimpse into a character's mindset. So, what if we applied a historical lens to one of our favorite series? What might the battle stances of Kingdom Hearts characters reveal about their personalities and roles? I may not be a master fencer, but I've done my research, and the internet is a bastion of knowledge I'm excited to share with you. So, hear me out. Terra's stance is his anchor in the storm, a symbol of the discipline he clings to as he fights to keep the darkness at bay. Hear me out. Let's get creative, because Terra's wielding a greatsword one-handed. While it's not impossible to use one with one hand, you'd lose power, speed, and precision compared to a saber. But Terra is him, so we'll let it slide and focus on historical one-handed techniques. As the original Riku, it's fitting to use Giacomo's guide to analyze Terra's stance. The low ward keeps the arm down by the side, usually pointing toward the enemy. Giacomo considered this ward ideal, as it is the foundation for which the other wards branch out. The arm is elevated just enough to react while also comfortably maintaining the position. A strong foundation for prolonged combat. Terra's reliance on fundamentals aligns with his struggle for control. He's been taught to suppress his rage, recalling Ericus's teachings in stressful moments. His default to a foundational stance reflects his attempt to find comfort and discipline as he battles the darkness within. Alright, this is one hell of a stretch. I'm claiming that someone wielding a greatsword is using a ward meant for rapiers. But hey, Kingdom Hearts already takes the creative liberty of having Terra swing a greatsword one-handed, so I figured it's fair game. Actually, let's talk about that for a second. If your only exposure to greatswords come from video games, you might be surprised to learn that they weren't as heavy as they seem. The average greatsword weighed between 5 and 7 pounds, 2 to 3 kilograms. Turns out, weapons are actually designed to be used by human beings. Oh wow, who knew? So wielding a greatsword one-handed isn't impossible. It's just incredibly impractical. A greatsword could be anywhere from 60 to 70 inches in length, and since it's gripped near the bottom, using just one hand makes the grip even less stable. That means weaker swings, less control in a clash, and an overall loss of leverage. And while it's not as heavy as some might assume, its length and weight still makes swinging it with one arm more taxing, sacrificing speed. On screen, you're seeing footage from the YouTube channel Robin Swords, a HEMA practitioner with plenty of instructional videos on the platform. A lot of the historical manuals I've referenced in past videos I first discovered through his channel. As you can see, swinging a greatsword one-handed can be done, but it's more of a situational move than a go-to strategy. And that's exactly what made finding historical references for Terra such a challenge. I love the guy, but he's not making things easy for me. Unlike his successor, Riku, whose form has been the most accurate thus far. In fact, the connection between them is what originally inspired the topic of the original short, which led me back to Giacomo de Grassi's work. To be fair, Terra isn't breaking all conventional practices. While relying solely on one hand isn't ideal, Giacomo did suggest that anyone wishing to wield a two-handed sword should be equally skilled with both hands, meaning they should understand how to wield it in either hand. I guess we could say Terra overachieved when it comes to mastering that fundamental. It's also worth noting that it's better to end a thrust with one hand, as it allows you to maximize the range of a two-handed sword by stretching your entire body forward. Think of Dante's Stinger move as a visual demonstration. This technique also creates enough distance to smoothly transition into another ward, either by stepping forward or retracting the sword. As for the specific ward mentioned earlier, one of the key details in Giacomo's teachings is that the low ward is meant to point toward the enemy, not away from them, closer to how Geralt moves in The Witcher 3 when strafing. That said, the rest of the posture matches up pretty well. so that's why I went with it for the original short. I also thought it was a nice touch to draw a stronger connection between Terra and Riku. Not only did Terra bestow the Keyblade to Riku, but the two also share obvious similarities, their connection to darkness and their shared desire for redemption. Terra desperately wanted validation from his father figure, so when I read Degrassi's description of this stance as the most reliable base ward, I interpreted it as a strong foundation, something fundamental to fencing. Ericus is the one who taught Terra how to fight, and is also the man whose approval Terra so desperately sought. That's how I arrived at this interpretation of Terra, a character relying on the discipline of his training from the man he admires the most to overcome his struggles. Stoicism is definitely a theme surrounding Terra's character, and something I appreciate is how being taught to suppress his abilities set off the domino effect that led to his downfall in Birth by Sleep. Suppression often gets mistaken for stoicism, but true stoicism requires reflection, analyzing your emotions to understand the source of your troubles. That's the path to genuine self-control, something Terra unfortunately couldn't achieve in time. That said, if we're willing to stretch things further like our name was Luffy, we can turn our attention to one particular pose Terra takes and discuss the Wrath Guard. Returning to Joachim Meyer's Art of Combat, the Wrath Guard is one of the foundational stances in German longsword fighting. It positions the sword diagonally over the shoulder, creating both an offensive and defensive posture. From this guard, a swordsman can deliver powerful, decisive strikes while maintaining readiness to deflect incoming attacks. And while Terra is undoubtedly known for his strength, at the end of the day, this seems more like a cool pose he takes rather than a deliberate connection to historical techniques. Much like the rest of the Kingdom Hearts cast, if we're being honest. However, in the end, his poses, realistic or not, carry the weight of tradition. Aqua strives to embody an unwavering ideal. Hear me out. Her stance involves rotating the body sideways, leading with her left foot and exposing her left arm. From certain angles, you could argue that her blade is obscured by her body. This reminds me of the wakigamai, where the sword is intentionally hidden to disguise its length, making it effective for surprise attacks, especially back when there were no regulations on blade size. This was done two-handed, similar to the longsword's tail stance, but I think Aqua is more than deserving of some leniency. The deception suits Aqua's magic-oriented fighting style. She doesn't need to physically overpower opponents like Terra, she only needs a well-timed, decisive strike. Aqua can unleash a barrage of magical attacks from a distance, overwhelming her enemies before they even get close, and if they do close in, they still have to be wary of her reach when she shifts back into her stance. This harmonious blend highlights her creativity and ability to adapt to her unique strengths, the very qualities that set her apart as the Keyblade master of her generation. Sora's self-taught approach might have been onto something, because Aqua is the fourth character we've covered who uses a tail stance, albeit one-handed. We covered the wakigamai earlier, but the specific iteration I'm referring to this time is known as wakigamai on Ken. The only difference is that you angle the body to hide the blade. Admittedly, this is a little confusing because one source lists it separately from wakigamai, while the other doesn't. I imagine this is because it depends on the school of swordsmanship, but for the sake of this video, I'll just present both sources on screen. Seki Sensei from the YouTube channel Let's Ask Seki Sensei briefly covered the advantage of hiding your sword with your body, but Kaz Kobayashi from the YouTube channel Samurai Kaz refers to this as a specific variation of wakigamai. Both instructors are teaching from different schools, so I imagine that's where the discrepancy lies. The deceptive element of this stance is one of the most creative exploits of our visual systems I've read about in the context of sword fighting. And it's not like real-world combat is like a video game, where you have to keep ticking away at a health bar. All it takes is a well-aimed strike to end a fight. Better yet, there's another form of wakigamai that operates on the same principle. In Asayama Ichitenryu, it's called Hangetsu, half moon. Hangetsu uses a one-handed grip while the body leans forward, aligning the sword with the knee and torso. This stance deliberately exposes the head, baiting the opponent into striking. The advantage of the one-handed grip is increased reach compared to an opponent using both hands, providing just enough space for the user to swiftly pull back and counter with a wrist-cutting strike, combining evasion and offense in a single motion. Land it and the fight is over. They won't be holding that weapon anymore. Along with, well, anything ever again. In hindsight, this actually aligns more with Aqua's stance. How did I miss that? That daily YouTube Shorts grind really messed with my attention to detail. These techniques are such a creative way to overcome differences in strength, which was the core idea of my original short. Honestly, it's the kind of ingenuity you'd expect from someone with the title of Master. With that being said, I also originally wanted to include an interesting parallel we can make to Terra, but left it out of the original video to make it entirely unique to Aqua. The wakigamai isn't just a stance for deception, it's also used to practice upward swings, transitioning between left and right positions while stepping forward. It's essentially part of basic sword training, so I think we can use this to also emphasize Aqua's focus on fundamentals, which feels especially fitting because her path as a Keyblade Master demands near perfection. If Terra clings to structure as a means of keeping the darkness at bay, Aqua could treat it as a standard she has to meet. The fundamentals become a measure of her success, a way to validate that she's living up to the expectations placed upon her. Aqua is also the most magically adept of the Wayfinder trio. In fiction, magic is often portrayed as something that requires structure, discipline, and precise execution to master. In this sense, her magic perfectly complements the disciplined, fundamental approach reflected in her stance. Her sword also acts as her spellcasting focus, or wand, if you want to sound boring. I imagine this is one of the reasons why she uses one hand instead of two. My interpretation leans heavily on insights from the light novels, which offer a closer glimpse into her inner struggles. Aqua's anxiety over Ericus's expectations reveal a battle she actively fights within herself. Not only does she strive to adhere to the standards of light, but she also carries the added burden of responsibility for Terra and Ventus. After achieving the mark of mastery, her first reaction isn't joy, it's guilt over Terra's failure. This burden grows heavier as Ericus reinforces her role as the responsible one, assigning her the task of managing his own struggle with Terra's darkness. When Ven runs away, Aqua is thrust into the role of caretaker, no longer just figuratively, but in every sense of the word. It's no wonder Aqua feels the weight of anxiety. Yet in her mind, this anxiety itself is a sign of failure as a Keyblade Master. This inner struggle mirrors Terra's own experience with Ericus, though Aqua tries not to let it show. Thus, she comes across as self-righteous, when the reality is that she's just as blind and is using the limited perspective she knows to navigate her situation. The wakigamai, specifically its use as part of basic sword training, could be used to further accentuate this character detail. Defaulting to the basics of her training mirrors how she navigates her situation in Birth by Sleep, relying on the biased wisdom of her master as a way to comfort her anxiety over the burdens she carries. But Aqua is more than just her thoughts, which is why I wanted to highlight the creative implications of this stance, showcasing her ability to adapt and find innovative solutions, even under immense pressure. It stands as proof of her unwavering resolve to stay true to her ideals, even as the weight of her responsibilities threatens to overwhelm her. Ventus turns his greatest limitation into the very weapon that will defy all expectations. Hear me out. Ventus' standout feature is his reverse grip, where the blade is held in the opposite direction of a standard grip. This grip is highly effective for quickly drawing a weapon in close quarters, nullifying any advantage the opponent gained by closing the distance. However, after the draw, it demands more effort for the same result as a standard grip. The wrist doesn't naturally bend upward, so slashing requires more exertion from the arm, and the blade's length becomes irrelevant due to the need for leverage. Fortunately, Ventus' Wayward Wind Keyblade is shorter than the average Keyblade, more like a Key Tanto, which makes it better suited for stabbing, quick draws, and simultaneous dodges and attacks. Yet, because his blade is slightly longer, Ventus is deliberately handicapping himself. A choice fitting for an upstart challenging the world's perception of him. Ventus is the underdog underestimated by everyone around him, including his own family. Every swing of his blade is meant to shatter the strongest of expectations. My people, we did it. I remember dreading the idea of getting closer to Ventus because I didn't think there would be anything I could talk about regarding historical swordsmanship. Let this be a lesson to all of us who may underestimate the creativity of mankind. Firstly, let me expand on the drawbacks I mentioned. When I say the wrist doesn't naturally bend upward, I'm referring to radial deviation, in which the wrist bends towards the thumb or radial bone. I didn't mention it at the start, but this was also a hand reveal video. Oh wow, look at that. Watch out, OnlyFans. Radial deviation has a much more limited range of motion compared to ulnar deviation, where you pivot the wrist toward the pinky finger, or ulnar bone. If you're doing a reverse grip, then radial deviation would be the natural motion for it. But because the range is so limited, you would need to put more of your whole body into it to get more range on your slash. Meanwhile, a standard grip would require less body movement to do the full range. Now, simply relying on your wrist for a swing will destroy your wrist. So both of these handling styles will incorporate the full body. However, one motion is more ergonomic for sword fighting than the other. I also briefly mentioned the concept of leverage, which in simplest terms means how much force you can exert through your blade. With a standard grip, you are at your strongest at the guard of the sword, but that force weakens as you move further down the blade toward the tip. Robin Swords has a fantastic demonstration of this concept. Notice how using the tip of the blade to push against the opposing guard does nothing. But when he uses his guard at the tip of the opposing blade, he can exert force effectively. The reverse grip shifts the leverage even closer to the guard, meaning you'd need to be closer to your opponent to exert the same amount of force as with a standard grip. This is why the reverse grip is better suited to shorter weapons, where the force exerted is more concentrated and stable throughout the blade, rather than falling off dramatically the further along the blade. However, this effect is most noticeable in slashing attacks. For thrusts and stabs, the reverse grip remains effective, which is why it's often used with shorter weapons, like daggers or tantos. Holy shit, my weapon replicas actually came in handy. I originally got them to mount on my wall as a decoration next to my setup, but past me didn't realize how clutch he came in for current me. Now that we've gone through these drawbacks, it is cool to see there was some application for a reverse grip. Seki-sensei returns to demonstrate how the reverse grip is mainly advantageous for drawing your weapon quickly in a close quarters situation. If your enemy has already closed a significant amount of distance, then drawing your blade normally will just get you hurt. With this method, not only do you draw your weapon more quickly, but you also merge your draw with an attack. This emphasis on speed suits Ventus. That aspect is what sets him apart from the others. Terra is physically the strongest, Aqua is the most magically adept, and Ventus is the fastest. However, the only caveat is that his blade is longer than a dagger or a tanto. Some of his keyblades are longer than his arm, so unfortunately his swings will have limited offensive versatility. It makes you wonder why someone would want to do this, which made me think about the plot of Birth by Sleep and how Ventus is underestimated by everyone around him, friends and enemies included. He's treated as a pawn in the machinations of others, even when he was a faction leader in Union Cross. That would naturally frustrate anyone. So the idea of this reverse grip being a sign of rebelling against the expectations of others fits him. The reverse grip isn't just a handling technique here, it's a reflection of Ventus's desire to defy expectations. We're nearing the end of this little thought experiment of mine. Only 2 more to go. Yep, only 2. Like and subscribe to be notified when the conclusion comes out. All my links are in the description. And as always, my people, thank you for watching.